It is important to remember that the authoritarian movement that took power in mid 20th century Germany didn't begin its rule with open brutality. It began with paperwork, medical jargon, and the calm insistence that it was simply restoring order. The violence didn't start with gunfire. It started with language crafted to make the unacceptable sound reasonable. That's the part history keeps trying to warn us about: the lie of reasonableness. The regime never pretended its policies were meant to help the people it targeted. It didn't claim that religious minorities, ethnic groups, or LGBTQ plus individuals would benefit from being pushed out of public life. It didn't pretend disabled children would thrive in special care facilities. Instead, it labeled these communities as problems, threats to the economy, to public morality, to national security, to the supposed health of the nation. And once a government convinces its citizens that certain people are problems, the solutions start to look like common sense. Historians and political analysts note that this pattern isn't trapped in the past. Around the world, including in the United States, commentators have pointed out how certain groups are framed as dangers, burdens, or corrupting influences. Immigrants, political opponents, LGBTQ plus people, trans individuals, disabled, and neurodivergent people. Many observers argue that these groups are often described in ways that echo older authoritarian playbooks, not identical, but recognizable. The regime in Germany put a medical mask over state violence. The treatment of disabled people under that regime shows how far a government will go to disguise cruelty as care. These killings weren't framed as punishment, they were framed as mercy. Doctors filled out forms that looked like clinical evaluations. Nurses used soft tones of caretakers. Families received polite letters about sudden illnesses. The entire system was engineered to look like medicine, not murder. Disabled people weren't cast as enemies. They were cast as internal defects, flaws in the national body that needed to be corrected. Commentators today note that when modern governments cut disability services, mock disabled individuals, or frame neurodivergent people as burdens, they are tapping into a long, dangerous tradition: the idea that some lives are less valuable, less productive, and therefore less worthy. The regime in power in Germany in the mid 20th century sort of sorted these problems into two categories with one dehumanizing logic: that it divided its targets into two ideological boxes. One was for instance, disabled people. They called them internal biological defects, and quiet medicalized violence was wrapped in euphemism in their case. Then there were the ethnic and religious minorities, external threats. Public militarized violence was framed as self defense in their case. Different narratives, same conclusion. Some lives didn't count. Political analysts argue that modern rhetoric often mirrors this split. Some groups are framed as dangerous outsiders. Others are framed as internal burdens dragging the nation down. The labels change, but the logic is familiar. The regime didn't say, "We're killing people." It used phrases like resettlement, evacuation, special treatment, final measures. These weren't slips of the tongue, they were deliberate tools, a linguistic buffer between the public and the truth. Modern commentators also point out that harsh policies today are often wrapped in Similarly, neutral language, security, order, protection, efficiency, bureaucratic phrasing that hides human cost. The early program targeting disabled people, Action T4, wasn't a side note. It was a blueprint. The personnel, the methods, the paperwork, the psychological distancing, all of it became the infrastructure for later mass violence. The regime learned that if you wrap cruelty in enough administrative language, people will accept it as policy. Political scientists warn that this is why rhetoric matters. It is not about predicting identical outcomes. It is about recognizing the mechanisms that make cruelty feel normal. Authoritarianism rarely arrives with a roar. It arrives with forms, diagnoses, and promises to fix something. It speaks in the calm tone of officials who insist they're protecting the public or improving efficiency. That regime in Germany didn't start with camps. It started with the idea that some lives are burdens. Once a society accepts that premise, the rest becomes terrifyingly predictable.